Hello everyone and welcome to a true positional masterpiece from yesterday's Pro Chess League. It's the Levitov Chess Wizards versus the Indian Yogis, and it's Daniil Dubov versus Vaishali. It's a brilliant game. Hope you guys enjoy it. Let's check it out. Dubov opens with pawn to d4. We have knight to f6 by Vaishali, knight to f3, pawn to d5, and c4. We have pawn to e6, going for the standard queen's gambit declined, and the bishop to g5, the standard way. Or the traditional variation, bishop to e7, we have e3 castles, and now queen to c2. Now this is a very, very rare move. Here usually knight to c3 is played, or you can capture on d5 or something like that, but queen to c2 is a very rare. We have pawn to c5, striking against the center, d captures on c5, and now queen to a5 with check. We have knight bd2, queen captures on c5, and now there is one game where rook to c1 was played. It was played in 2019 between Dmitry Andreikin and Michael Adams. The game ended in a draw, but here we have pawn to a3 by Daniil, and it is now as of move 9 that we have a completely new game. So d captures on c4, and now bishop captures on c4, and Vaishali goes for pawn to b5. She wants to trade queens here. We have bishop back to d3. You could also consider b4 here. It's very odd that Dubov did not consider b4 here, but okay. Bishop back to d3. Vaishali trades, captures, and bishop to b7, and it's a pretty equal position. Everything is pretty much the same. The material is completely even. Both players have the bishop pair. One thing that's different is that Vaishali already advanced her b pawn all the way to b5, so she controls more space on the queen side. Bishop back to d3, going after the pawn here, and pawn to h6, attacking Dubov's bishop, and you can't really trade to pick up the pawn here because the pawn on b2 will be hanging as well. So just bishop back to h4, pawn to a6 defending, and king to e2. We have knight b to d7, rook h to c1, and of course now you want to control the c file as well. Rook f to c8, opposing white's rook on c1. Here knight to b3 and bishop to d5, attacking the undefended knight. And here Dubov just trades both pairs of rooks off the board, and rook to c1. Now you could maybe try something other than trade here, but trading is good for black, as you'll see. Rook captures, knight captures, and pawn to g5, attacking the bishop, bishop to g3, and now knight to e4. And this is where it really becomes interesting. We have bishop to c7. Of course, Dubov does not want to give up the bishop pair. He goes bishop to c7, bishop to f6, she goes for the b2 pawn, and now knight to d4, defending the pawn, and now knight e to c5, going after, sorry, knight e to c5, going after the bishop on d3. And here Dubov should probably figure out a way how to maybe keep the bishops, but also maybe just improve his position with moves like pawn 3 and b4. Maybe it's time to stop thinking about the bishops, and he does go pawn to f3 here, but now knight to e5, and here again he should figure out a way how to give up the bishop pair, but he wants to keep it. Bishop to c2, and now Vaishali plays knight to c4, and it becomes very, very hard to keep your pawns. How do you defend your b2 pawn? There's no good way to do it. A move that should allow for an equalish game is pawn to b3, but here Daniil played pawn to b4, and this is one of the very, very few occasions where b4 is not the strongest move, but maybe even a really bad move, as the pawn on b4 will be an easy target for black's pieces. But okay, this is rapid, let's not forget that. Knight captures on a3, she wins the a3 pawn, and now bishop back to d1. The problem is if you go b captures on c5, then bishop captures on d4 first, eliminating the defender of the bishop, and if he captures, knight captures, and okay, Dubov would have a passed c pawn, but Vaishali would have a passed a and b pawn, and the bishop nicely controlling all of the squares here. The knight is beautifully placed, also the d4 pawn is hanging, so this would be just straight out winning for her. So instead, bishop back to d1, Dubov keeps the bishop pair, knight to d7 now. We have bishop to b3, offering a trade, and now knight to c4. We have knight to d3, getting the knights into the game. Bishop to e7 now goes after the b4 pawn as well. Now the knight on d3 cannot move. So pawn to e4, bishop back to b7. We have knight to c2. And then now comes knight c to b6. We have king to e3, improving the position of the king, king g7, and now knight to e5, offering a trade of knights, but just bishop to f6. Here we do have a trade knight captures, and knight to d4. Now it's an excellent square for the knight. So bishop back to e7 and now knight back to c2. Here Dubov needs to keep an eye on that b4 pawn, and as you can see, it's not easy defending it there. We have bishop to f6 and now knight to d4 and now bishop to e5. If Vaishali repeats, Dubov will most likely repeat and we will have a draw by repetition. But here we have bishop to e5 and finally a trade of bishops. Bishop captures, knight captures, and now comes knight to e2. And this is, it's very hard to understand what Dubov wanted with this knight to e2 move, but they were both in time trouble. Here you should just play anything and just keep the knight on d4. You need the knight on d4 to stop the black knight from coming to c6, from winning the b4 pawn, but he played knight to e2, and now Vaishali just goes after the pawn. There's no stopping that. Knight to c6. We have pawn to g3, she captures on b4, knight to c3, and now knight back to c6. We have pawn to f4, and now g captures, and pawn to e5 now, trying to mess up white's pawn structure. Bishop d5, not allowing the knight to move. E captures with check, king captures, and now knight to a5, or rather, preventing the knight from moving anywhere other than a5 or d8, as you can move there to defend the bishop. So here, king e5, just improving the position of your king, and now pawn to b4. She starts advancing her past b pawn, knight to a4, and now bishop to c6. She wants to force as many trades as possible, as she is up 2 pawns. So if you eliminate the pieces of the board, then the king and pawn endgame is easily winning. We have knight to c5, and now bishop to b5. We have king to d6, and now comes knight to c4 with check and king to e7. So the f7 pawn is hanging, but just knight to e5. Nicely defending that. King d6 attacks the knight, knight to g6. Now stopping the king from reaching that f7 pawn. Pawn to e5 and now pawn to a5. She continues advancing the queenside pawns. Knight to b3 and now pawn to a4. We have knight to d4 and now bishop to d3. Of course, Daniil knows it's over here, but it is rapid. They're both very low on time, so he will try and get a draw here. But the problem is you cannot reach the pawn and you cannot advance the e pawn. So you really don't have much choice here. So here he tries e6. You want to try anything here. F captures, knight captures with check, king to f6, and now knight to c5 attacks the bishop and the pawn, but just a nice calm bishop to c2. We have knight to d7 check, king to g5, knight to c5 now, and now knight to f4, going after the bishop, bishop c4, and now pawn to a3. Those pawns are unstoppable, and of course Dubov will have to give up a piece to stop the pawns. We have king to e5, bishop back to b1, now controlling the a2 square, and now knight to a6, going after the b4 pawn, pawn to a2, and now Dubov has to give up a piece, but at least he will grab both of the pawns. Now, bishop captures, knight captures on b4, and bishop back to f7. And now, okay, Dubov did grab the 2 connected pass pawns, but the problem is, even if he somehow sacrifices this knight for the pawn, Vaishali still has a bishop and a knight, and of course you all know that you can checkmate with a bishop and a knight. So there's really no way to for him to save this game other than Vaishali going for some sort of a self-mate, which never happens, and maybe losing on time. So here we have king to e4, king to g4, knight to a6. Now we have bishop to d5 with check, king to e3, knight to g2 with check. We have king to f2. Now comes bishop captures, king to h3, king to g1, and now knight to h4. We have knight to c7 attacking the bishop, and now just the bishop to c4. You don't even have to worry about this. You can just go after the pawn with knight to f3 check, but you have to move the bishop at some point. So bishop to c4 was played. We have knight to e8, and now knight to f3 with check. This will win the pawn. King h1 doesn't help you because you cannot get a stalemate here. Even if you didn't have a knight, you always have that g1 square. But okay, king to f2 was played. We have knight captures on h2, knight to d6, and now bishop to d3, nicely controlling the knight. king to e3, we have bishop back to b1, and now king to f4. We have pawn to h5, knight to f7, and now pawn to h4. We have knight to e5, and king to g2. We have king to g5 attacking the pawn, and of course king to g3 defending. Knight to c4. We have knight to f3 with check, king to h5, and now pawn to h3. Knight to e3. Here bishop to d3 was played, now comes king to h6, and here Vaishali played pawn to h2, and it was in this position on move 82 that Daniil Dubov resigned the game. As there is nothing more to be done here. Really nicely done by Vaishali. There's that weird quote, I don't remember how it goes exactly, like maybe even Magnus said it or someone, like the hardest thing to do in chess is to prevent your opponent from showing what he can do, and we all know what Daniil Dubov can do. So here Vaishali really prevented Dubov from doing anything with the white pieces, and she just outplayed him completely positionally, just went for the endgame, won a nice endgame, and over the course of 82 moves in time trouble for both of them, she definitely outplayed him. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Interestingly, Daniil played both against Vaishali and her brother Pragnananda, as they both represent the same team. Prague only got a draw, so very nicely done for the family against Daniil Dubov. So yeah, there we have it. Hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Glenn Beaton, Chris Foster, Bernard Romani, Funky Monkey, and Ravishing Reptiles YouTube for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check two of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.